All right, I'm rocking. We can roll it.
I'm pleased to be joined by one of the hosts behind one of my favorite YouTube channels, College Football Nerds. It's Daniel. Daniel, how you doing, man?
I cannot complain. Like I told you earlier, if I did, you might be the only one who cared.
Look, I, for one, was so excited about last weekend because it came out of nowhere, right? We had one top 25 matchup on the schedule, and then we get four of the top 11, not only beaten, but beaten by unranked opponents, highlighted by Vanderbilt, knocking off number one Alabama. Going into this week, one of the things that I've always been excited about is we circled this week weeks ago in the preseason when we got Ohio State, Oregon, we've got OU, Texas, we've got Kansas State, Colorado. And I wanted to start with, the squad, the squad over here at least. OU, Texas, it is not looking good from the Sooners. They're 14.5-point dogs in this one. I understand that anybody worth their salt is also going to pick Texas as the number one team in the country. What do you see transpiring on Saturday in OU, Texas?
So, first of all, I want to say how frustrated I was that last weekend went the way it did because every time there's a dull weekend on the schedule, people always say that. They always say, watch out, it's going to be crazy. And they keep being right, and I'm tired of it. I want a boring weekend for once. No, really, it was wild. It was nuts, and I'm sure Oklahoma fans want to repeat that this weekend. And you're right, like all the money's going to Texas, and the line I think it was 14.5 yesterday. I don't know where it's at right now. I do say in general that the favored team in rivalry games usually wins about the same clip as normal. So a lot of people love to say you could throw the record books out. Well, I mean, you can throw them out, but they still have some value. So you just got a record book in the street. But in this game, I think it's interesting to note that you've got teams that they're trying to get healthy. And so I don't know if we know what version of Oklahoma we're going to see in terms of who they've been. Got people calling me who they've been and who they're going to be once they get right. I do think that they're still challenged at quarterback, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're not still the best offense that Texas has seen so far, which is noteworthy.
That's not saying a whole bunch, right?
No.
Michigan ain't have a quarterback. UTSA, ULM, all respect there for what they are achieving at their level. It's just no match for Texas. It says more about Texas that they could walk Arch Manning out there and everybody from Texas on out is confident about what that guy's going to be able to bring to the offense. However, the thing that I would say about Oklahoma that they have improved upon and might actually make a difference is not giving the ball away, right? We saw Arkansas basically pick up the defensive blueprint that Oklahoma showed against Tennessee. And all they did mostly differently was get great play out of quarterback, right? Taylor Green decided he wanted to show up for this one with 19-26 for 266. And then Malachi Singleton, after a rocky entry, ended up taking them over the line quite literally. My frustration would come if the defense at Oklahoma can't seem to get anything done. Because the one shining light for this Brent Venables team in 2024 is the front seven, particularly R. Mason Thomas, and then Danny Stutzman being able to run around, chase people down, and then you can get some great play from guys like Connie Walker, Billy Bowman. Perhaps you get a couple of takeaways, but I'm not so much enthusiastic about what the offense is going to show. I'm just hoping that the offense can stay out of the defense's way, and if we got a ball game late, that's all we could hope for if you are an Oklahoma fan. Am I wrong here?
I mean, think about what you saw against Tennessee, and everybody's going to laugh at Tennessee, Alabama for their losses this weekend, but I don't know that Texas is going to be some 3-touchdown favorite over Tennessee because of what happened with Arkansas, and transitive property and all that. But what I'm saying is Oklahoma's already played a team that can beat a roster. Oklahoma's already played a team that has the potential to win at a high level. And what did they do? They shortened the game, and they figured something out at quarterback at the end of that game that might translate down the road. If nothing else, it gives you something as an opponent to have to prepare for. What you saw from this Oklahoma team on tape, even from games that they won big like Temple or kind of big like Tulane, and especially the struggle against Houston, is you saw an offense that you didn't necessarily have to prepare for specifically. And that's what bit Alabama this weekend is they're not going to take a week off to prepare for a triple option inverted veer kind of thing because it's Vanderbilt, right? And it bit them. And so now, if nothing else, you have this mental energy that has to be focused towards what you've got at quarterback that is at least a little bit different. And the other thing that you have at quarterback is the opportunity to shorten the game. And that's what Oklahoma's got to do is you say their defense has got to give them something. And yeah, I think that something is shortening the game enough where you can get a couple of explosives and at least stay in it. You got to be in at the half like Iowa was against Ohio State, but then you got to not fumble the bag in the third quarter.
That's a very interesting game to check there because the other thing that I noticed from that game is I believe Ohio State had one possession in the first half of that game against Iowa. Some of this is you're putting the ball on the floor. Some of this is you're throwing the ball to the other team. But after that offense got started, there was no stopping it. That's where I want to focus when we talk about Texas just here for the second. What is it that you want to take away if you are Oklahoma and you hope to win this game?
I think historically, and Texas fans get all over us about this, but the data is there. Historically, Quinn Ewers is very streaky as a downfield passer. He's not an overly efficient passer. Like he does a lot in the short game that's schemed out for him. And there's some games where he's just out of his mind. Like he can just absolutely drop dimes like he did at Alabama and Tuscaloosa last year. He was that guy. And there's other games where he disappears. And so Oklahoma needs to figure out defensively a way to give him looks where he is that guy that's not killing you deep. And, I think it still remains to be seen if they've got the same deep threats as they did last year with guys that are tearing it up in the NFL, right? Like Isaiah Bond transfer from Alabama, I think he's a great receiver. I don't know that he's an elite plus receiver, at least not taking the top off kind of receiver. And I do think you have to frustrate that offense to the point where if they're going to score, it's going to take them 6-7 minutes plus and 13-14 plays plus and not give up, you can't have a 3 and out on one side and then give up just a back-breaking deep shot on the other side.
It is a combination that we're seeing people really try to lean into more and more, which is we're going to try to play complementary football, which mostly means we're going to try to run the ball, sit on it as much as we can, and then play defense and try to take away that one thing, not necessarily that you do well, like you're pointing out with Quinn, but that thing we know could break us, that thing that we know could hurt us. Oklahoma, Texas, always one of the great rivalry games in the sport, but particularly when you got a number 1 ranked Oklahoma or a number 1 ranked Texas, it's always going to be a game that people want to see. However, the night game is Ohio State at Oregon. And I circled that one way back when Oregon entered the Big Ten for no other reason than what Dan Lanning has been able to build over there and what Oregon has showed here historically. Like, it was a different regime at Oregon, but they went to Columbus not long ago and got themselves a W without Kayvon Thibodeau on the field, CJ Verdell running wild. Now you have what we think is the best Ohio State team we've seen since 2019, walking into an Autzen that is historically a really difficult place to win with an Oregon team that has some things to prove to the rest of us. So off the top, what is it that you're looking for in this matchup of top 4 opponents?
What I'm looking for is to see what Vegas is seeing. Right now, they're seeing a 3-point game, which if you didn't look at the number and you just said, hey, random college football fan who actually watches college football and doesn't just have a bunch of NFL stuff on their Twitter profile, what do you think about these two teams and how this game's going to play out? They're going to say, oh, Ohio State's going to kill them. And just it has that feeling of like that's what it's supposed to be. But I don't know that we know everything because Vegas is saying, no, it's a 3-4 point game. And so, yes, Ohio State looks like that monster. And Josh and I both, we do a top 10 every week. And in this week, we had Ohio State number 1 ahead of Texas in our top 10, partly because of, going back to Texas, that Mississippi State game, I don't think was a great performance. Conversely, Ohio State second half Iowa was a great performance. First halves, they've been struggling a little bit. 7-0 at the half, and your 7 points came out of your script. that's a little bit concerning. It's a road game. It's, they played one game away from home this year. It was Michigan State. And, I don't imagine that was a too terrifying atmosphere. What I want to see in this game is, can Howard press their offense vertically, or is it just an efficiency game? And I want to see if these two defenses are as legit as so far the numbers have shown. And it's really tough because they haven't played great teams. You got one that gave up 7 to Michigan State, one that gave up 10. They haven't played great teams. Honestly, Boise's the best team between both of them. And at first, when we saw that game, we're like, oh, crap, Oregon sucks. But I think that we're seeing now that, one, it was just a little bit of sleepiness at the beginning of the year, but two, between the two of these teams, that's the one good team they've played. So I want to see if these two defenses hold up against what I think are two good offenses, but I also am curious if, it's hard to know how good two teams are when the game against one another is the only game that they've played that's of substance. And I'm curious to see if one unit, so you've got 4 units, 2 offense, 2 defense on both sides of the ball, or both teams, if one of those units just completely falters, one of those 4. Because that's the only way we're going to come out of this, knowing that either one team was a fraud, or if one team wins close, we're just going to think they're both really good and really not know much out of it all.
It would also give us a great answer as to who really does have the best defense in college football, because we've seen a lot of good defensive play. We haven't seen one program do what Georgia had done or Iowa had done in years past, where they're just, hey, this is what they're able to do. I know there's lots of contenders for this, but I think you bring up a very good point. This is an opportunity for Ohio State and Oregon to face good offenses, if not great offenses, and show us what they're really working with. I want to pick on the Will Howard bit for the same reason I want to pick on the Dylan Gabriel bit, because these are two guys that get 7th round draft grades, maybe undrafted grades, who are leading programs that should be in the college football playoff and hope to win national championships based on what they are as a veteran presence, their ability to understand what they see on the football field. And if you're Will Howard, I've said this, and I don't mind telling you, Daniel, it's Will Howard doesn't have to convince me vertically, because all he's got to do is be Craig Krenzel, because they are that talented literally everywhere else. I don't know that that's the same example I would lay over the top of Dylan Gabriel, because that dude is just really great with his decision-making, and that wide receiving core is great. Say nothing of what Jordan James showed us against Michigan State. But I do think the two are comparable. So in as far as the quarterbacks are concerned, I think we agree that we're a little bit more concerned about Will Howard than we are Dylan Gabriel. But after what I saw against Michigan State, I'm asking this sincerely. Why don't I just bring 5 every single time I can? Maybe 6 against Dylan Gabriel, who seems to have regressed when it comes to throwing against pressure.
I think that the key is, and to me, Josh and I did a preview of this game, and the thought here was, if Dylan Gabriel doesn't turn the ball over, how much of a just complete cosmic shift does this have on what this team is in this game? Because a lot of their struggles so far, and even really if you look back his entire career, a lot of the struggles are he can play hero ball, but that hero ball is going to come with a tax, and it's a turnover tax. But I got it kind of in an argument with some Ohio State people on Twitter, because a lot of them are so used to a CJ Stroud or Justin Fields who can just completely take over a game, who can put up 40, 50 points if they need to against a really good opponent. And they don't need that anymore. The trickle down from the NFL, the defenses that are being played in college football now, it is not 2018. It is not 2019 anymore. You don't have RPO offenses that you have to be able to score 40 plus against to win in a big game. Right now, Will Howard has to play just within this offense, which I think schemes a lot of things for him easy. Chip Kelly knows what he's doing, and he's probably enjoying not having to head coach and deal with all the other crap, just focus on offense. But yeah, I think Craig Krenzel is probably a little bit of a stretch, because again, we don't know if these teams have elite defenses or they just haven't played nobody. But I think some of that is gonna show Saturday, and really, it's just, to me, can you avoid turnovers and can you avoid successive 3-and-outs? Because to me, that's just as bad as a turnover.
I'm curious to find out what Jeremiah Smith can do in this game, and I'm going to focus on Jeremiah Smith because that is the way they talk about him at Columbus from the moment he stepped on. So many different quotes that get to who this guy is. Number 4 being a true freshman, being your number 2 wide receiver. But I'm stuck on Chip Kelly saying he showed up at 17 and he could play on any NFL team you want him to right now. And we're seeing flashes of that. We had the fumble, but we're also seeing the one-handed grabs. And more than that, we're seeing Chip Kelly trust him and Will Howard trust him in the way that it feels like they trust Emeka Egbuka, who was also number 1 coming out of high school in his class at that position, to say nothing of what Brandon Ennis might be able to do, Carnell Tate might be able to do. If you are Ohio State and you have this weapon over here, how much do you think of using him as a decoy now that we know that they're going to pay attention to him, or is he just going to be a part of the offense that you run naturally against a really quality opponent?
I think that there's probably some left in the bag offensively. We asked this question when Alabama went in to play Georgia. Van Dyke going down in the Wisconsin game probably helped them not have to come out of their bag at all, and they kind of sprung it on Georgia. And I think Ohio State in that same way. They haven't had any close games. I think there's probably 40% of this offense you haven't seen a lot of, namely, what have we seen from the tight ends? What have we seen that hasn't been just on the nose offensive football? And there's probably some of that there. But look, I think he's that dude. I think I don't even think there's a decoy necessary. I will say this is not a Ohio State wide receiver room that you've seen over the last few years. And that's not a shot to him. It's kind of like when you play a bunch of teams that aren't any good, that doesn't mean you're bad. Just because he came into a wide receiver room and was able to shoot up the charts to number 1 as a freshman doesn't mean he's bad, or doesn't mean he's not as good as people say he is. But it might speak a little bit at the same time to an offensive or a wide receiver room that, Egbuka, if he was elite as he was as his, recruiting status, he would have already been in the NFL, right? So there's a reason why he's still here. But that's not to say that you can't have one, alpha 1A guy that elevates everybody else because he gets his, but is it effectively a decoy every play he doesn't get his?
Speaking with Daniel at College Football Nerds on YouTube. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Daniel and Josh have been doing this for a very long time, and I am always learning something new from the two of them. Anytime they want to tell me about what they predict and what they preview, go check out the channel. Daniel, who's going to be the number 1 team in the country on Sunday?
It's interesting because let's say these 2 games play out, the 2 marquee games play out the way that Vegas says they're playing out. Do you give more credit to Texas, who beats a brand? Say what you want about Oklahoma. I said coming in the season 8-4, but largely because of the schedule, not because of the roster. That's a good staff. That's a well-recruited team. They've got dudes on that roster. If you beat an Oklahoma, let's say by 2 touchdowns, versus if you beat an Oregon on the road by 3, like which one do you weigh more? Because we're talking about Texas and we're talking about Ohio State. To me, I'd probably lean towards the Oregon win as putting Ohio State as number 1. But man, that's tough because I think it's tough to beat a rival in the middle of the season, coming off a bye week, comfortably. Like that is really hard to do. So I also will say that we've seen enough from Oklahoma to know who they are, and who they are isn't a bad team. We don't know everything we need to know about Oregon. So it could be that Ohio State gets a ton of hype from beating Oregon, and Oregon goes on to lose 2 or 3 more games this year. But then they keep that credit for beating the number 3 team in the country, which is tough. For me, I would lean towards Ohio State, and I would also say that it probably doesn't matter because 74 teams get in the playoffs anyway.
I think you are right. The way that I couched this was Alabama was nowhere near what we thought as the number 1 team in the country until such a time as they beat Georgia, and that was good enough, right?
Right.
I think you're going to reward the team that beats the higher-ranked opponent, full stop. Whether that be OU, Texas, or Oregon, Ohio State, I think Oklahoma would see a significant jump if they were to beat Texas. I think Texas is marginal. You're the number one team. There's nowhere to go. All you can do is cover the spread here. But if you are Oregon and you beat Ohio State at home and you beat them by whatever the spread is, I think you're going to default to number one. Texas is going to move to number two, and vice versa, frankly. Ohio State goes into Austin and does what a lot of people can't do, get a win there. It's going to count. But to your point, 12 teams in the playoff, but more than that, I think we're going to see number one change hands at least half a dozen more times because of what Vanderbilt has put into motion for all of us, frankly. I'm so enthusiastic about this sport, and I wanted to give this to you before we get to our last game, though. Does 2024 kind of rhyme with 2007 for you, or is that just us having this recent memory?
I think it's very 2007 like without the stakes, because that's BCS era. That's an era where the stakes couldn't be higher. You only get two teams to play for it, and still you get to lose a bunch of games and make it in. That was such an aberration. And it's interesting because a lot of people are saying it's parity, and Josh and I are both saying it's volatility, because Vanderbilt's roster is nowhere near Alabama's roster. Vanderbilt won because of a certain confluence of events that all went their way, and they deserve complete credit for it. But Vanderbilt isn't competing with Alabama for players, and they still won't be even after this win. Arkansas the same. I don't think we have a ton of parity still, but what I do think we have is, in at least in the short term, we have a fairly exciting scenario where, because we have the expanded playoffs, we have this ability to make a mistake on judging quality, and it's going to happen because of how disjointed and how imbalanced scheduling is. So you have some teams with super hard schedules, some people with super easy schedules. All of them might have this room to lose one or two games and still prove it at the end. So for that reason, I'm happy for the expansion. But it also gives us a situation where the season is very backloaded, because if it doesn't feel like anybody's played yet. You got Alabama, Georgia. Do you remember that LSU played USC this year? Does anybody remember that game? It felt like it had a lot of gravity in the moment, but now that's kind of lost a lot. But going down the stretch, it's going to be both crazy and super interesting, and super conferences have somewhat created that, but it's also concentrated that interest in the Big Ten and the SEC in a way that I don't think I love.
That is a very good point, because one of the things that I do at work is I rank top 25 teams as I see them, and then do a playoff prediction mostly based on those rankings. And one of the things that I thought was most interesting is how I would much rather be the number 5 seed than the number 1 or 4 seed. 1 through 4, mm-hmm. I would much rather be the 5. I get to play off home game against a team that I would probably play in the non-conference anyway. So, it's not out of the question that Oregon could play Boise State again, 5-12 matchup at Autzen. And we know how that probably goes. Also, I'm going to be able to play the number 4 seed, which at this point feels like Iowa State. We're going to pick Oregon. Would you rather have the bye? I don't think you would, because by the time you get to that number 5 seed, you've already played a game yourself, so that bye week no longer matters as much as it did. I'm curious to see how this plays out and whether or not the selection committee decides to do what I think I would do, which is manipulate this so that we get the matchups that these seedings were intended to give, as opposed to, why the hell do we have a team that played in the Big Ten Championship or the SEC Championship matched up against Boise State, what have you, knowing we're probably going to give them the easier road to a national championship, which leads me to Colorado versus Kansas State. I think we're going to have a hard time getting a second team from the ACC and the Big 12 into the playoff if things keep trending the way that they are trending, with 9 SEC teams and I believe 6 Big 10 teams in this week's top 25 alone. But that Big 12 championship is still going to get you automatically qualified, we think, unless Boise State can somehow be one of those 4 ranked Power 5 highest ranked champions, not Power 4 champions. So knowing that the stakes are all over the map for the Big 12, do you expect perhaps a potential Big 12 championship participant to come out of Kansas State, Colorado? I don't know. Is that a good question to ask at this point?
It might be a little early just because, it's tough. It's tough, but we get so much more information every week. Like, here's some information that, Colorado fans were killing us on Twitter because we said this summer CFB 25 having Colorado as the 20th best defense was completely unfounded. They were in the 140s last year. There's only 133 FBS teams. It was bad. They're in the hundreds. And then this year they're like, well, what about this team we beat and this team we beat? And then the big one was UCF. And now we see UCF had 6 points against a pretty bad Florida defense until they went into prevent and at the end of the game put on a late touchdown. So, that's more information that we can now react to, but it still feels early to me. I can't believe we're in week 7 and we're saying it's early for us to make those sort of at least look around the corner guesses, because you've got a number of undefeated still teams in the Big 12 right now, and some of those are going to be good teams and some of those are going to be pretenders. But like BYU and Iowa State right now look great. Like, they look legitimately good. Kansas State, what do we know about that BYU game? Like, was it a blip on the radar? I mean, 38-9 is quite a blip. Or is the team that handled Oklahoma State the one that we should be looking at? By the way, that one-score win at Tulane, not looking so bad right now. That win against Tulane for Oklahoma, not looking so bad right now. Like, that's a decent football team. So, to me, it's so early that it's hard to tell. But I will say this. The losers of conference championship games are so unequally punished versus everybody else that makes it in as an at-large that it's really not fair. And they need to get rid of conference championship games in general. I think they're silly at this point. But you think about a team like Notre Dame, who, super genius, by the way. Like, don't join a conference. Don't join the ACC. Keep your, all the TV deal money to yourself. But also guarantee yourself a home game in the playoffs every year. Because in 11, people are still talking about Notre Dame in the playoffs, and like, it's ridiculous that you would count them out for losing NIU. They probably won't play a ranked team this year, right? Maybe if A&M doesn't pull an A&M and they hang on, that'll be their only ranked opponent all year. They beat them in the first week of the season, I think. But Notre Dame, no, they can never get a bye. But yes, they will always get a home game. That almost likely, and that's free money, like local business and for your university, but it also pretty much guarantees them a spot in the playoffs every year. But then you've got teams that play that extra weekend, aren't sitting at home, so Notre Dame effectively gets a bye. Anybody that gets an at-large bid that doesn't play in a conference championship game gets a bye. So I think you're almost better to not play in the conference championship game, keep a high ranking, don't take that loss, and just come in as a 7 or a 9 seed and not have to get beaten up against what's going to be guaranteed a good opponent that conference championship weekend.
It's a very good point, and it also brings about the tinfoil hat among us in that, are you going to manipulate this so that a Notre Dame might get in over what is a more deserving program, perhaps? Let's call it the University of Tulsa, who sucks right now and is my alma mater. But that's why I'm bringing it up. You going to put Notre Dame in, or you going to put in an 11-win TU? That's not a hard question for me to answer, knowing that we do play these games because of the television money. To the conference championship part, I hear you, dog, but like, for me, I look at championships as banners. So like, I think there's something like 500,000 YouTube channels with 100,000 subscribers. Doesn't change the fact that I would want my plaque. So if we get to play for championships, I want to play for a championship. The rest of it be damned, so I can get my little hardware. And then if I can go for the big one, right, let's do that. But I like to have that game because I do think it's meaningful. But I'm also a different kind of college football fan, and I admit that. The thing I wanted to really
I'll give you a little pushback on that because – one, have you seen the tiebreaker scenarios in the SEC and the Big Ten? And it's like, did you wear the correct size shoe last Tuesday for half of your team, or did someone wear black, and blue together? If you did, you're disqualified, because you could legitimately have 5th or 6th team down winning a tiebreaker that has nothing to do with the games on the field, because the conferences are so big now that unless you have 10 or 11 conference games, everybody ain't playing everybody. So to me, I think it's like, let's let's put down the facade and admit that the emperor is butt-ass naked and just say, okay, here's your regular season championship, awarded based on the standings, and let's get on with it. Because do you think, was it 22 Alabama or 21 Alabama would rather have that national championship trophy for that where they lost to Georgia, or the SEC championship trophy when they beat Georgia? I don't think they even care about the SEC trophy at this point. So I think we got to find a way to award champions in the same way that they do. We're trying to NFLificate this sport. So if we're going to do that, how does NFL do it? I mean, they do it based on seeding. I mean, they seed based on records, and let that be that.
I like the point, and I think it's a good one. I really do. I just don't trust us to be adults about this, Daniel. Like that's the thing that really drives me crazy about college football. As much as people want to be purist or are claiming this or that is ruining the sport, they also do not want to do what I think you and I would like, which is let's be honest about what it is that we are after here. And let's be open to the conversation that perhaps some of the things that we have put in way are just clothes that we're asking that emperor to wear. When really, nah, dog, you're the emperor whether you're wearing the clothes or not. Can we move along with this? I don't think we're going to get there. I don't think we're ever going to get there. I think there are too many people that care about decorum and tradition for tradition's sake. Because even with name, image, and likeness, right, when it comes along, we don't even have the fortitude to put in good rules that everybody would have to follow because we're afraid of what we might not be able to maximize for ourselves. It's why attorney generals are filing suits left and right. It's why you will have somebody that will play an arm and a leg for a player that probably isn't in that same market just because they would rather have him sit on the bench for them than go play for the opponent. Like Manchester City in the EPL. Does it work from a financial standpoint? Yeah. Does it make the sport a little less fun? Also, yeah, but you're still watching it, right? And I think
thought you were going to say like Texas A&M, but okay. So I think it really boils down to the fact that conference championship games make a lot of money. And let's not kid ourselves. Like, I talk about this. I don't know if you remember. There's old heads like me that remember when regular seasons used to be 11 games, right? And back then they were talking about playoffs. And what did they do instead of playoffs? They said, okay, we're not going to do the playoffs, but we're going to give everybody a 12th game. And you know why? Because that's 130 teams that play a game versus 4 teams that play a game, an extra game. And so it's all about money. And they're not going to take a game that's established and accepted that prints money off the books now because we've expanded the playoffs. They're just going to take more money because we've expanded the playoffs. And I think that does come into, we could talk for hours about whether or not that's a good idea for player safety and things like that, which I don't think it is. But at the end of the day, you can't have super conferences that get bigger and bigger and have conference championships mean something, because you're literally going to have 4 or 5 teams with the same conference record that, you look at Missouri or look at Miami. Miami will not play a top 50 team this year, 5-0. They will not, at the end of the year, when it all shakes out, they will not have a team on their schedule that's in the top 50, right? How do we know how good Miami is relative to the rest of the ACC for them getting in the conference championship game versus somebody else? We don't. So yeah, I think it's a little silly. I could rant all day, but I'm going to hold you up, so I'm going to let you keep rolling.
I want to ask this question sincerely because I think you know better than most how much I despise most Heisman voters. Not the Heisman Trophy, but it's just too bloated. There are too many people that get to vote on it. I say this as a man that gets to vote for the Broyles Award, and there might be 24 of us that have that opportunity, that honor, and that is because the finalist list should be unassailable, right? The 3 guys that should be up to win that award, any one of them could win and should win, right? It's just who do we think is the best among those 3? However, when I look at the Heisman Trophy, they get it wrong as much as they seem to get it right. This year, I can't believe I'm actually having to convince people what Travis Hunter is doing we've never seen done before. And he's doing it at a high rate. The only question is whether or not he can sustain this for the rest of the year, while I have other people that want to tell me about Ashton Genty who can't remember Donald Brown, who can't remember Donald Pumphrey, who don't even know about LaDainian Tomlinson. And I'll tell you, this is what he's up against. He may rush for 2,400 yards. Barry Sanders rushed for 2,600. I'm asking this sincerely. What does Travis Hunter need to do for you to win the Heisman Trophy?
He doesn't have to convince me because he'd be in New York. For me personally, just because I have always maintained, I maintain this at every level. At some point, 50 years ago, a bunch of idiots decided that you can't be the best player in the country unless you play for the best team. It's the same way that AP voters say, hey, you play the first, second, third, and fourth best team in the country. You lost to all of them, so you can't be in the top 25. Like, okay, I can't beat the number one team, so I can't be ranked. You know, I have to be the best player on the best team to win an individual award. It's insane to me. And it's funny because you'll see the national tenor around who should get in the Heisman Trophy candidacy. You'll see it change after big games. Whoever did the best in a big game is immediately up at the top. You know, I think Jalen Milroe has improved dramatically under DeBoer's offense. And I think he's playing really good football. But like everybody had at the top of the Heisman list after he beat Georgia, but he didn't beat Georgia. Alabama beat Georgia. Kalen DeBoer's scheme beat Georgia as much as Jalen Milroe did. So for a guy like Hunter who could walk onto most P4 squads on either side of the ball and start is crazy. But he's not going to put up crazy numbers. People don't remember Charles Woodson being an elite talent or Ndamukong Suh being elite talent and not putting up numbers that they can relate to. And I think it's really because we have, once you dilute the pool with too many people, there's regional bias for sure, but there's also this thing that like I can't relate to you being good unless I see numbers that are as good or better as someone else who's been in that spot. And I think that's a little ridiculous too, because each year is different. We talked about what defenses are doing now. If you're performing at a high level offensively, it could be 70% of what somebody won this trophy in 2018 or 2019 was, and be better than them, just because how things shake up year to year. Marshall Faulk would have been my reference point there. By the way, I used to watch them on Saturday night on ESPN when nobody else is watching. So that would be mine.
Look, man, I'm with you, and I think that's the reason why I started that conversation with could they appear in the Big 12 championship game, because I think if he has a big game in there, you can sew it up. To your point, though, Tua Tagovailoa was going to be the 2018 Heisman Trophy winner, and then he got hurt, and Jalen came in, and Kyler went off against Texas, and Kyler wins the Heisman Trophy. I don't like the recency bias week to week. I do know that I make content every day around college football, and one of the things that we talk about every week is the playoff, the rankings, and who's going to win the Heisman based on what we have seen and based on those numbers. I'll add this for any Heisman voter that is watching this, though. Travis Hunter is the first player in history to have 10 TDs and 5 INTs since we started going to Division I. Like, I should say that. So, and if you want to take it further, you can. But what Charles Woodson did at Michigan doesn't even rate what Travis Hunter is doing presently at Colorado. It's just whether or not you think Colorado is a good enough team, which, as Daniel so aptly pointed out, should not matter.
I will give a little bit of context that I think is fair. If you're a voter, it is fair to want to see him play good teams.
Is Kansas State a good team?
I don't necessarily. I'm sorry?
Is Kansas State a good team?
I don't know yet.
Okay.
That's what I was saying before. Like, when you look at their schedule, you don't know if that 38-9 against BYU is who they are or dump truck at Oklahoma State. But I'll say this: like, it's hard to do. It's hard to contextualize if you're a voter and you see so much bigness of weekends concentrated in the SEC and the Big Ten to really properly contextualize what Hunter's doing. And I think that's where it hurts a team like Colorado to not play a team like Georgia out of conference, right? It hurts because you want to see look, if Travis Hunter did any of what he does, if he did that one weekend versus Alabama in week 1 or week 2, recency bias wouldn't matter. He would have that data point to hang on, and he would ride that out to at least a trip to New York for the rest of the year. But also, to your point, I think we've got to sometimes get outside of the box of just looking at numbers and box scores. And I say this as someone whose whole show is based around that, and just watch him play. Like, let's put all the numbers aside. The guy's out there for, over 100 plays every game. Like, watch the guy play. And from that standpoint, I think it's pretty clear that he's one of, if not the best player in the country.
That is Daniel of College Football Nerds. He and his buddy Josh do an outstanding job covering the sport. If you think that you are smart about college football, you will watch this channel if you haven't already, because these two men will make you smarter. Daniel and Josh are mentions for me. Both of these guys have come through for me in ways that I can't even begin to describe to you. If I tell you that they're smart, remember that it is me who's giving out that one, and I don't give that one out to too many people. Daniel, thanks so much for joining me here on the #1 college football show.
Thanks for having me. You have a blessed week.